Hello everybody, my name is Rachel and welcome to my channel Kalanati. Today I resume my October wrap-up with part 2. I think I said previously that this was going to be all fantasy. I lied. I forgot that I had a romance novel. So we're actually going to progress from a romance to fantasy romance and then into actual fantasy. So let us begin. So that one contemporary romance novel that I forgot I had on my list is A Cowboy to Remember by Rebekah Weatherspoon. This is the first in the California Cowboys romance series, and despite the fact that I am not into the cowboy thing in any way, or really like the American Southwest dude ranch, horse ranch thing, I'm not into it. I actually quite enjoyed this, mostly for the characters and how they treated each other. Like the family dynamic in this was really good. So this is about a woman, Evie, who is kind of like a celebrity chef. At the beginning of the story, she is attacked by her rival. She hits her head and she temporarily has total memory loss. She doesn't remember anything about herself or her life or whatever. And she needs to recuperate out of the spotlight where people will not see her or notice her while she's getting her memory back. So her friends actually sent her to live with a family that she had grown up with, but she doesn't have any memory of. And through this, she kind of reconnects with one of the men in the family who she had a romantic relationship with before, but they had a falling out of some type and they're kind of getting to know each other again in the story. It was really interesting. I liked the characters a lot and I just enjoyed, I think it just struck me that all these characters really cared for each other. Like Evie's friends, her assistant and everything, they really love her and want to take care of her. They're protective of her. And the family that she goes to stay with, they also have a great dynamic with each other. Like they have their tensions and conflicts and everything, but everybody is just very respectful of each other. And for whatever reason, this is the thing that I just really took away from this book, is that the people treated each other well. And the one conflict in like the relationship here, the whole like third act breakup thing, is handled in a really different way, which is that communication needs to happen and it does happen and people take their time, basically. So people use their words. And most of the problems in the book come from, the fact that Evie can't remember things and people have to be kind of delicate about that. So I really enjoyed it. I'm still not into the cowboy thing, but I think I will read book 2. Then I read Ambush or Adore by Gail Carriger. This is the third Delightfully Deadly novella, and this series of novellas explores the epilogues and happily ever afters for characters from her finishing school series. These are all basically the friends or schoolmates of Sophronia. They're the generation of characters prior to the characters from Soulless, basically. So these are not novellas to read unless you have actually read the finishing school series, and probably a bunch of the other books in the Parasol verse as well, because they're super spoilery for other events in the series. This one is Agatha's story, and she is like the wallflower, the invisible intelligencer or spy who is basically married to her job and doesn't let herself get super close to other people. And wow, is this story pretty darn different from other things that Carriger has written in the Parasol verse. It is actually kind of a sad, melancholy story. It is about how two people spend pretty much their entire life being apart and not letting themselves get together until very late in life. And it's also very interesting because it takes place over a very long time. Like it spans about 50 years. So it's mostly flashbacks and just, jumping around in time and the progression of this character's relationship and then how they finally end up together. And I really liked it. It made me feel very sad. I actually kind of teared up at certain parts in it, and it was good. Like, I'm not saying this is bad in any way. I love Carriger and her full-on humorous, ridiculous, over-the-top mode. That's what I read her stuff for. But this was just different and really heartfelt, and I'm glad that she wrote this instead of just making it one more over-the-top ridiculous story. It's really good the way it is. Next up is the fantasy romance. I actually categorize this a bit more as a fantasy novel than as romance, which is why it is my segue into the actual fantasy section. This is Paladins Hope by T. Kingfisher, which is a pen name for Ursula Vernon, and this is the third in the series. I think it's called the Saints of Steel series. All of them are Paladins this, Paladins that. I think the first book is Paladin's Grace. So this is Galen's book, and it is a male-male romance. His love interest is a doctor, or more like a coroner named Piper. I had totally forgotten that Piper was actually introduced in the first book. I think he was like this side character that popped up, and well, he's in this one too, and a lot more about him. The paladins in this series are basically berserkers, and their god has died, so they kind of don't have a purpose or anything anchoring them anymore, and it's their romances and them finding their place and the person they want to be with and all of that. So lots of angsty, too good for this world paladin stuff, and very, very angsty, slow burn romance stuff. We were basically screaming at the characters, you like each other, just admit it and like hop into bed or something. It was a lot of fun. Now, the reason why I kind of categorize these more as fantasy than as romances is because the actual plots are very much like fantasy mysteries. They're like investigating things and trying to figure out like kind of these like serial murders with a magical cause and all of that. So there's a lot of stuff going on aside from the two characters making googly eyes at each other. I have explained this book in a really terrible fashion, but it is a lot of fun and it's very funny, and I highly recommend it. Now let's talk about some fantasy comics. I'm going to start with the 7th volume of Hat Atelier by Kamome Shirahama. I'm really enjoying this manga series. Volume 7 continues exploring more of Kifri's backstory. Kifri is Coco's teacher. She's the little girl at the heart of the story. He has not been all that he seems for a while. We learned some very interesting things about him in this volume. I felt like there was some real progress in explaining what is going on and the plot and everything, so very much enjoyed this installment. Then I read The Girl from the Sea by Molly Knox Ostertag. This is a young adult fantasy graphic novel about a teenage girl who is gay and might be coming out eventually. She meets a Selkie girl who needs her help in saving the local seal population from a very noisy, disruptive tourist yacht venture. So it is kind of their attraction to each other and also the main character's difficulties with her friend group and coming out, basically. I thought this was a really sweet, lovely story. I really enjoyed it, and I really like Molly Ostertag's art style. It just really works for me, so thoroughly enjoyable. Wish it was longer. I always wish that Ostertag's graphic novels were like 100 pages longer because I could always use more of the stories, but it was really wonderful. I really enjoyed it. Then I read La Tortuga que queria dormir by Roberto Aliaga. This is a children's picture book entirely in Spanish, and I read it entirely in Spanish. I actually understood it. I was kind of surprised, and I liked it. I have very limited selection of Spanish materials from my library, so a lot of them are very like old children's picture books that I don't particularly care for, but this one I did find enjoyable. It is about La Tortuga, the turtle, that really wants to sleep all night, all winter, but it keeps being interrupted by its friends leaving it gifts, and it just really wants the gift of silence. I related. So yeah, I liked it, and it was good Spanish practice for me. Dark Waters by Katherine Arden. This is the third in this middle grade horror series about Ollie and her friends Brian and Coco, who were kind of being stalked, haunted, terrorized by a weird smiling man. Yes. So this series is actually arranged by the seasons, and I literally did not realize that until I was reading this book. The first book, Small Spaces, is fall, and then Dead Voices is winter, and Dark Waters is the spring book. So that means the final one will be summer. So this one involves the children going with their parents onto Lake Champlain, and they get like lost on this mysterious island, and they're being terrorized by the lake monster. And also the smiling man is still after them. This one did not have as much of the like really creepy, scary scenes as like the previous book did. Like Dead Voices scared the crap out of me. There were parts of it that I had to skim read because it was way too scary. This one did not have that same kind of feel, though there are some kind of tense, suspenseful moments in it. I liked this. It's entirely from Brian's perspective, which is new, and I thought that was an interesting choice. But it ends very abruptly. Like, this is quite short. I think it is the shortest out of all the books, and it just ends like with this major thing happening and then just sort of like fade to black. Okay, wait for the next book. And it wasn't very satisfactory. It just kind of felt like Arden didn't have anything else to say before the next book, so she just ended it very quickly. And I think it should have been a little bit longer and kind of fleshed out that cliffhanger ending a bit better, and it did not. Despite that, I really enjoyed it. I read it pretty much an entire sitting on Halloween, really enjoyed everything up to the end, and gave it like 4 out of 5 stars, which is a pretty good rating from me. And lastly, I listened to the audiobook of The Inheritance of Orquidea Divina by Zoraida Cordova. This is an adult fantasy novel. It's a standalone, and it's kind of this multi-generational family saga about the descendants of Orquidea Devina, who are kind of gifted her magical talent, but it has a very mysterious origin, and they might be hunted down by some mysterious thing because they have this gift now. So it is kind of like Orchidia's grandchildren finding out more about her, like where did she come from? She came from Ecuador. What was her life like? What did she leave behind there? How did she get this kind of magical talent? All this stuff. And then it's also interspersed with flashbacks in Orchidia's perspective to her life. So the reader is kind of seeing her story as her children, her grandchildren, are also learning it. It surprised me in that sometimes I could kind of tell what was going to happen, but then there would be things where I was like, wow, Orquidea did this? I would never have expected that. And then when it got more into the actual like magical element, that was really interesting to me. So I loved the family at the heart of this, the grandchildren, Marimar, Reynaldo, Tatinelli, even Riri, who's a great grandchild. Really interesting, and I really enjoyed being in all of their heads. And Orquidea herself was just a pretty fascinating person. I think it was a really solid fantasy novel, a different kind of story, different kind of cultural background in it because the family is partially at least from Ecuador, and just great characters, great relationships, and a really interesting ending to it all. So I liked it, and I'm really glad that I gave Cordova another chance. I actually read one of her YA fantasy novels. I think it was called Brujo Born. I read that like years ago and I wasn't super impressed with it, but if she comes out with any more adult fantasy or adult works, I will be on them in a hot minute. And that is everything that I read in October. As always, if you have read any of these and you want to discuss them, please leave me a comment down below because I love hearing from you. And I'll be back to talk to you about more things that I've been reading in November very soon. I'm trying to get back into a schedule of doing at least 2 wrap-ups per month, but stuff in my life is about to change pretty dramatically over the next couple of weeks, and I have no idea how that's going to affect my reading and my filming and just everything basically in my life. So if things don't go according to plan, that would be why. But I'll talk more about that later when it is actually more relevant. So anyway, enough rambling from me. Thank you so much for watching as always. I appreciate you being here. And until next time, bye.